Good evening, everyone. Sorry for the delay. Thank you for joining. I'll make sure we got this. Okay. Tonight's class is, of course, in the merit of all the Jewish people, especially in the land of Israel. All those who need to be rescued, that need a salvation, and those in the front lines should all have whatever they need. Okay, let's get into it. Make sure this is on. Yes. Okay. So we are continuing with our study of Pirkei Avos, or study of the ethics of our fathers, chapter 5. Let's jump right in. One of the things that this chapter discusses is the 10 miracles that happened in the Holy Temple. So let's get into these 10 miracles and what they were, and maybe we can learn a lesson from them. So 10 miracles were performed for our forefathers in the Holy Temple. The first one is that no woman ever miscarried from the aroma of the meat, of the cooking meat. Okay, now the meat obviously was brought in the temple smelled very good, and it obviously had a very strong smell. And according to the Talmud, that whenever a woman has a strong craving, it could be potentially dangerous, as we'll see. Be potentially dangerous to the child and the mother's life, and therefore she must be fed this meat. Now, obviously, many times the meat was not supposed to be eaten by this particular woman who smelled it, because the sacrifice in the temple, every sacrifice has different rules. Some are eaten only by the Kohanim, some are eaten only by the owners, etc. So obviously, it would be a big violation of the Torah to feed a woman who is not supposed to be eating this meat, even though that could be potentially done to save a life. It never happened. It never happened that a woman smelled the meat, was craving it, and therefore we had to violate the Torah to save her life. That is the first miracle. The next miracle is the meat never spoiled. Okay? Obviously, you're doing, when it comes to in the Holy Temple, especially around the holidays, you have this Passover sacrifices and holiday sacrifices. There were tens of thousands of sacrifice being done, and obviously there's also the daily communal sacrifices and Shabbos and Yantiv, Rosh Chodesh. It never happened that one of the sacrifices spoiled. The meat never spoiled. The next thing is a fly was never seen in the slaughterhouse. Pretty simple, right? It's a very attractive place for bugs. A slaughterhouse could have lots of meat, lots of blood, and all kinds of things that apparently flies are attracted to. In the Holy Temple, there never was a fly seen in the slaughterhouse. The next miracle is that the rain never put out the fire on the altar. If you're familiar with the structure of the Holy Temple, the outer part of the Holy Temple is called the Chatzar, is outdoors, and then there's the inside of the Holy Temple is the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKadoshim, that is indoors. That is the place where you have the menorah and the shulchan and the table and the inner mizbeach, and then you have obviously the Kodesh HaKadoshim as well. That's also those are more indoor buildings. So, but in this, the Chatzar was outdoors, it was under the sky, and it did rain, but the rain never put out the fire. As the verse tells us that a fire should always be constantly on the altar in Leviticus. So it kind of, I guess, in deference to this biblical commandment, there was a miracle, and the rain never put out the fire. Another thing related to the fire on the Mizbeach, on the altar, was that the smoke that came from the fire never got blown away by the wind. It was a straight column of smoke that went straight in the air, and no matter how strong the wind was, it never could blow the smoke to any direction. It always went straight up in the air. Another thing is that the Omer offering that is offered on the second day of Pesach never became disqualified. Now, the Omer offering, like we said, is on the second day of Pesach. It allows all the new grain to be allowed to all the new grain of that had grown in the previous year to now be used. And if there would be a problem, it cannot be substituted. You weren't allowed to go and cut new grain of specifically barley, etc. And you would have to, then all the new grain for the year would not become permitted, because it has to be done by this only when this offering is brought. And miraculously, over the hundreds of years of the temple, over 1,000 years, I guess you could say, including the Mishkan, the tabernacle, those years, over thousands of years, it never happened that the Omer offering became disqualified. Another one is that the 2 loaves that are brought on Shavuos, there's a special sacrifice of 2 loaves of bread that are brought on Shavuos. Never was an issue with those 2 loaves. And again, because it was a holiday, you cannot bake a new loaves. So therefore, it would become a problem, because that allows all the flour from the offerings in the temple to be used. And if you did not do that, they can't bake new one, so you'd be stuck. And therefore, it was a miracle that it never happened. That new grain, that the loaves never became disqualified. Again, in over 1,000 years. The next thing is the showbread. Okay, there are 12 showbreads that were put on the table in the temple. They never became an issue. They never became an issue where they became disqualified or ruined or spoiled. Okay, so they were put on Shabbos, and they would bake them on a Friday. On a Shabbos, they would put them on the table, and they would take off the ones from the previous week, and they would eat them. And it never happened there was an issue, because if during the week they became a disqualification of one of them, then they would have to take it off, and then it would be left empty, which is disrespectful. It would be left empty until the next week, because they're only baked on Fridays. So, again, another miracle that happened in the temple. Another miracle that happened is that the Jewish people, when they would come to the temple, it would be extremely crowded. It says they were so squished that if somebody would be lifted up to try to see, or whatever it was, they wouldn't be able to get back down. They would just be stuck in the air, because it was so crowded that they couldn't get back down. However, even though it was so crowded, when there came time for prostrations that happened on the service of Yom Kippur, when the Kohen Gadol would say God's name the way it's pronounced, and everybody would fall on their faces and bow down, it says that every single person not only was able to bow down, they had 6 feet around them, space to bow down. So obviously a tremendous miracle. They would stand, squish, and all of a sudden it's time to bow, and there was plenty of space. Another miracle that happened in the temple is that a snake or scorpion never bit somebody in the holy temple in Jerusalem. I'm sorry, never bit somebody who was visiting Jerusalem. And lastly, no one ever, and by the way, those things were common. Apparently snakes and scorpions, they were indigenous to Jerusalem. So it was not like some random thing. Another thing is that no one ever said, I don't have enough space for my lodgings in Jerusalem during the holiday. Even though, obviously, like we said, there were so many tens of thousands of people, maybe even 6 figures of people coming. It never happened that somebody was like, I have no room. I don't have a place to stay. So the question is, what is so special about these miracles? So first of all, why is this important in general to tell us the miracles? And more specifically, as we've discussed previously, Pirkei Avos is ethics, and not just regular ethics, but extra special ethics, right? That this is beyond the letter of the law, deeper within the law. So why is this the place to say these 10 miracles? Is that really an ethical thing? Okay, so we could say maybe there's something in general that we see that these are miracles that happen in times of the temple, and it should encourage us to repent and bring Mashiach. But that would be more of a general idea. The Mishnah could have just said there was a tremendous amount of miracles that happened in the temple, and therefore we should behave, and therefore we'll have Mashiach, we'll have the redemption, and we'll have the Beis Hamikdash again. But why do we have to go into detail? So there must be something specific about the details of these miracles that must be a lesson to us. So let's get into it, some of these miracles, and what are the lessons that we can learn from these specific miracles. So the first miracle is that a woman never miscarried from smelling the meat. So this one, which is the first one listed, why would it be so important to tell us this, number one, like we've discussed already, but more so seemingly this miracle is kind of not directly related to the service in the temple. If you want to say that the ones that are about, the altar and the showbreads and the different sacrifices and the miracles that happen in the temple, that's very understandable. But this miracle is not really directly related to the temple. It's saying that a woman who passing by the temple and the smell of the meat will go very far. We know that it says that the smell of the incense that they would burn in the temple you'd smell it in Jericho, which is very far away. The Talmud does tell us some of these things are exaggerations, but obviously the point is that you could smell it for a long way. So obviously this is not directly related to the service in the temple. A woman doesn't have to be in the temple to smell this meat. So why is that? Why is it important to tell us this, especially as the first one? So let's take a step back to understand that this is actually directly related to the temple service. The Torah tells us that the reason for eating the meat in the temple is supposed to be done in a prestigious and in a great way, in a prestigious way. And it's not enough to be that you eat the meat, but it has to be eaten as a delicacy. And therefore, the Torah tells us that it should be roasted, cooked, or stewed in a delicious way, and then it should be eaten. In fact, the Talmud tells us in Tractate Zvachim that the priests are permitted to alter the meat and eat it roasted, boiled, or cooked and add spices, even of truma. Truma spices are not supposed to be eaten. Truma spices are not supposed to be eaten willy-nilly. Truma is the tithes from the produce. Now, even though that technically the taste of the meat could outweigh the taste of the tithe of the truma, nonetheless, the Torah allows the Kohanim, the priests, to eat it together. Why, we could discuss maybe another time. So we see here that the meat has to be cooked, because again, the Torah tells us it has to be eaten in a way of greatness, in a way of prestige. So therefore, these meat, who would be in charge? Kohanim. On their resume is piety, Avas Yisrael, love of their fellow Jew, encouraging the Jewish people in Torah study. Cooking is not on their resume. So what would they do? They bring it home and they would give it to their wives. And there were women who this was their job, or this is part of their life, was that their husband was a Kohen, etc. And therefore they would cook the meat. So therefore we see that this actually is directly related. The fact that women are smelling the meat of the Beis Hamikdash, the meat is not like some side thing that they happen to be passing by. These are women who are intimately involved in creating and fulfilling this biblical commandment of having the meat in a delicious, prestigious way. Now, not only that, we know that parents always want the best for their children, and so therefore, it is very natural for the woman to want the meat, because it's holy meat. It's meat that was brought, it's part of a sacrifice that was brought to God, and eating it is a mitzvah. Not only it's a mitzvah, there's it's literally eating holiness. In other words, there's no most times when we eat, there's the good parts of the food. This is even in nutrition, right? There are good nutritional values in food, and there are nutritional bad things in food, and therefore your body has to process it out. But when you eat on a spiritual level, when you eat the meat of the holy temple, there was no spiritual bad things. It's just eating holiness itself. So obviously the woman would want to be, she would be attracted to that, because it's good for her, good for the child, holiness. And nonetheless, it never happened. And we see when it comes to the laws of Yom Kippur, we see that actually this is it's actually also related to the child. That when the child smells something, that's what actually makes the mother crave it. So this is brought in the laws of, it's just in Tractate Yoma, which is the tractate discusses the laws of Yom Kippur. It discusses what do you do if a pregnant woman has a craving on Yom Kippur. So the halacha is that you're supposed to feed it to her, because it could be potentially dangerous, as we discussed earlier. So there's a few stories in the Talmud that give us a kind of idea of who were the children who were desiring the meat. So there's a story in the Talmud. The first story is in Yoma. Both these stories, are in Tractate Yoma, and it says as follows: one time there was a woman who was craving food. On Yom Kippur. So the people who were involved, they realized this could be a potential danger. So they spoke to Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, the compiler of the Mishnah, and they asked him what they should do. By the way, it's shameless plug. If you come to our Tuesday classes, where we discuss the sages, the first one that we discussed, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, would highly encourage that you watch those videos. Back to what we were saying. So they go to Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. What do we do? He says, whisper in her ear that today is Yom Kippur, and if not, then you give her the food. If it doesn't help, and that's what they did. They whispered in her ear that today is Yom Kippur, and it helped. She calmed down, and the craving went away. And Rabbi Yehuda Nasi said about this child who was in the womb that before I formed you in the belly, I knew you, and before you came forth out of the womb, I sanctified you, which is a verse in Jeremiah, chapter 1, verse 5. So we see he was saying that this child is going to be special, and indeed the woman had a child who ended up becoming Rabbi Yochanan, a very special person, one of the rabbis in the Mishnah and the Talmud. And then another story. There was once the same thing. A woman was craving something on Yom Kippur, and they came to Rabbi Chanina. And they asked Rabbi Chanina, what do you do? So he said the same thing. Go to there and whisper in her ear, today's Yom Kippur, see if that helps. And she tried. They tried. It didn't help. She continued to crave the food. So Rabbi Chanina said about this fetus, he said, the wicked are estranged from the womb. So indeed, the person born was Shabtai, the hoarder of fruits. Who was Shabtai, the hoarder of fruits? Apparently, he was somebody who was a fruit merchant, and he would hoard fruits and sell them at high prices during famine. Not a very good quality to have. So Rabbi Chanina was pointing out the fact that this child already in the womb wasn't listening to him, I guess, was a bad omen. So we see that this is directly related to the child. So we see here that nonetheless, this never happened. That it never happened that the child that a fetus had this desire for this meat. So we see they understood that it's such a great miracle that even though that no woman ever wanted to eat this meat. Even if obviously if they couldn't, they weren't allowed to eat it. If it wasn't specifically, if it was a sacrifice, they weren't allowed to eat. It never happened. So we see that this is directly associated with the temple, and it's directly associated with. It's actually the first thing that happens right after the sacrifice. It's brought to the Kohen's house in order to eat. So we see that it's directly associated with the temple. Okay, the next miracle, another miracle we'll discuss, is the miracle of snakes and scorpions. What's so important about snakes and scorpions that they didn't bite? Why not say lions and tigers and bears? Why snakes and scorpions? So we said we just mentioned, right, they are native to Jerusalem. But what's so important about that? And again, what is the lesson that we could derive from it? There's a deeper explanation of the idea of snakes and scorpions. We can see this from the Talmud in Masechtas Brachas, which is the tractate discusses prayers, and it says that there's a difference in Jewish law if you have a snake and a scorpion coming near a person while they're in the middle of prayers. So the Talmud tells us that if a person is being approached by a snake during prayer, he is supposed to continue praying. However, if a scorpion comes and approaches him during the prayer, the law is that a person should stop praying and address the situation. Okay, move over, whatever they have to do. So, what is the reason why? What's the difference between a snake and a scorpion? So the Talmud tells us that the snake is a scorpion is quicker than a snake. It's bad. It's worse for you. You could defend yourself from a snake. You can't defend yourself from a scorpion. So what's the difference between a snake and a scorpion? So in the Hasidic teachings, it says that a snake its venom is hot, and that essentially what the venom does is it goes into a person's bloodstream, and it's extremely hot, and it basically makes a person, I guess, overwork their body, and then, God forbid, there could be negative consequences. Versus a scorpion, it's the opposite. It slows a person down. It's like an icy effect on the person. And therefore, we see that the reason why the Talmud tells us what the difference between how we deal with a snake and a scorpion, is that if a person has another passion that is approaching them, so during prayer, so the Talmud tells us that could be dealt with. That is something that could be harnessed for good. You could harness another passion into your prayers and now use it as a passion for in service, divine service. Versus apathy, coldness, that's something you got to deal with right away. Apathy cannot be transformed. You can't be apathy is very, very dangerous and is quicker, as the Talmud tells us, at getting a person. So we see here that there is a special that the ethics of our fathers are not telling us just about that a snake and a scorpion never attacked someone, but they're teaching us more they're teaching us that in Jerusalem, if you're going to be in divine service, you have to deal with a snake and a scorpion. They each have their own way of how you deal with them. When you have another passion, that is something that can be harnessed. If you have apathy towards Judaism, that is something that has to be eradicated. And last miracle is the miracle of the smoke, right? When it comes to the smoke, it says that the smoke never blew in any direction, and there was never any issue of this. The smoke always went up straight. So again, we could apply this to the service of God in prayer. When it comes to prayer, we sometimes we could get distracted, right? There's this, we could get there are things that could sway us. In fact, in Shulchan Aruch, in the Code of Jewish Law, that when a person is reciting Shema, a person should not wink at his friend, make motions, or point with his fingers, even for the sake of a mitzvah. Okay? Person is supposed to be totally divorced from his personal affairs and not allow them to sway him in any direction. Even things that are a mitzvah, right? You're like, well, right now, maybe right in the middle of prayer, maybe it's the time to think about my Torah study, or now is the time to think about the charity I want to give. No, you're in prayer. A person should not be swayed by other things, not for your personal things, not for holy things. You have to be focused on your communication with God. So what we see here is that when we come into the ethics our fathers are teaching us, when it comes to the Holy Temple, which today, in our days, is service of God through divine service of God is through prayer. We don't have the temple, we don't have sacrifices. We are taught that the sacrifices are in place, that prayers are in place of our sacrifices. So therefore, the Talmud is telling us the same thing applies with us when it comes to our prayer, when it comes to our divine service, that we have to be true to and not be distracted. We have to know how to deal with passions, and we have to know how to deal with apathy. And like we talked about in the beginning, we have to also know who we really are. We have to know that we have to realize also that these are miracles, right? That it's not enough that these are just things that if we do what we're supposed to do, and if we follow the Torah and follow Jewish law and follow the rules and designs in order to do divine service, then God will give us the extra hand and make a miracle and help us succeed in our divine service and service of God. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining. Have a good Shabbos, and God willing, we will see you next week.